The security guard's hand was already reaching for my arm when I placed my worn leather briefcase on the polished boardroom table. Sir, this meeting is for executives. The security guard's hand was already reaching for my arm when I placed my worn leather briefcase on the polished boardroom table. Sir, this meeting is for executives, Blake Harrington said, smiling as several people laughed at my faded charcoal suit. Whatever you're selling, we're not interested. My daughter Rebecca would not meet my eyes. Dad, she whispered, please don't embarrass me today. I looked around this company my wife and I had built from an Ohio garage, but no one in that room recognized me. To them, I was only an old man carrying something that belonged in a museum. Then Blake ordered security to remove me. I rested my fingers on the rusted brass logs. Before you vote away this company's future, I said you should see what I brought. If you have ever been judged by your age, your clothes, or your appearance, please like this video and subscribe. Tell me in the comments whether you would have opened the briefcase immediately and share where you are watching from and what time it is there. 46 years before Blake Harrington ordered security to remove me from my own boardroom, Thornton Meridian Medical Systems did not have a glass headquarters, a private executive floor, or a polished silver logo. It had one folding table, two mismatched chairs, and a leaking garage roof. I was 30 years old then, working as a biomedical engineer for a medical equipment distributor outside Columbus, Ohio. My job was to repair cardiac monitors after hospitals had already purchased them. I spent most of my weeks driving across the state with a toolbox in the trunk of an old Chevrolet answering calls from crowded emergency rooms and rural clinics that could not afford newer systems. That was where I first understood how differently money could decide who received protection. Large hospitals replaced their monitors every few years. Small community hospitals kept machines running long after the manufacturers stopped producing parts. Nurses taped cracked housings together. Technicians borrowed components from broken units. Doctors learned to recognize the sound of a failing alarm because they knew a replacement might not arrive for months. One winter evening, I was called to a hospital near Dayton after a cardiac monitor failed to sound an alarm in time. The patient was a 59-year-old woman named Susan Miller. I never met her while she was alive. By the time I arrived, her bed was empty and her family had already gone home. A nurse stood beside me while I opened the machine. She had 3 daughters, the nurse said quietly. The youngest kept asking why nobody heard the alarm. The failure came from a worn relay that cost less than $20. The hospital had requested a replacement unit 6 months earlier, but the manufacturer's price was far beyond its equipment budget. I sat in my car that night with the broken relay in my hand and felt something inside me change. I had repaired hundreds of machines, but that was the first time I truly understood that poor design and high prices were not merely business problems. They could become empty beds. When I returned home, my wife Eleanor was waiting at the kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee. She took one look at my face and did not ask whether I was tired. She asked what had happened. I told her about Susan Miller. I told her about the relay. I told her I was sick of working inside a system where hospitals had to choose between safe equipment and paying their staff. Then I said the sentence that changed both our lives. I think I can build something better. Eleanor did not laugh. She did not remind me that we had a mortgage, a young daughter, and less than $4,000 in savings. She simply pulled a yellow legal pad toward herself and asked, "How much better?" That was Eleanor. She never treated a dream as real until it could survive hard questions. For the next 18 months I worked at my regular job during the day and in our garage at night. I designed a cardiac monitoring system with fewer failure points, replaceable modules, and an alarm circuit that could test itself continuously. Eleanor handled everything I could not. She called hospitals and asked nurses what they hated about their existing equipment. She recorded every answer in careful handwriting. She contacted suppliers, compared prices, and convinced a local machine shop to produce our first metal housings on credit. Our dining table became our office. Rebecca, who was only 2 years old, colored pictures beside invoices and engineering drawings. Some nights she fell asleep under the table while Eleanor and I argued about costs. We did not always agree. I wanted stronger materials. Eleanor wanted a price small hospitals could actually afford. You are not designing a machine for a laboratory, she reminded me. You are designing it for people who have to buy it. When our savings disappeared, the bank rejected our first loan application. Then it rejected our second. The third banker told me I was too idealistic to run a company. On the drive home, I told Eleanor it was over. She listened without interrupting. Then she walked upstairs and returned with the deed to the house her mother had left her. "I can use this as collateral," she said. I stared at her. "That house is the only thing your family ever gave you, and this may be the only thing we ever build that matters," she replied. I refused at first. We argued until nearly dawn. In the end, Eleanor did not persuade me by promising we would succeed. She persuaded me by saying we would regret doing nothing more than we would regret failing. The loan gave us enough money to build 12 working monitors. 2 weeks before our first presentation to a hospital purchasing committee, Eleanor came home carrying a brown leather briefcase. It was not expensive, but to us it looked elegant. The leather was stiff, the brass locks shone, and my initials had been stamped inside. I told her we could not afford it. She smiled and placed our first contract proposal inside. Every document you carry in this case will affect someone's life, she said. Never let it become just a place for money. That briefcase travelled with me to our first hospital meeting. The committee rejected us. It travelled with me to the second. They rejected us too. At the fifth hospital, a nursing director named Margaret Collins asked whether our alarm system could continue functioning if one module failed. I demonstrated the backup circuit and she stared at the monitor for several seconds. Then she said, "That is the first machine anyone has shown me that seems designed by someone who has actually stood in a hospital room." Her hospital ordered 6 units. Within 3 years we moved from the garage into a small rented workshop. Within 10 we had a factory outside Columbus and contracts in 7 states. We named the company Thornton Meridian Medical Systems because Eleanor believed Meridian suggested a line that helped people find direction. But growth brought temptations. Distributors asked us to use cheaper alarm components. Investors pressured us to shorten testing schedules. One national chain offered us the largest contract we had ever seen if we removed an expensive backup circuit. I refused. The board told me I was risking the company. Eleanor supported me in public, then challenged me in private to find another way to reduce costs. That was how we led. We protected the principle, then did the harder work of solving the problem. For decades, our rule remained simple. We would never ship a device we would not trust beside the bed of someone we loved. Then Eleanor became ill. Cancer took her slowly enough for us to say goodbye, but far too quickly for me to understand how to live without her. After her funeral, I continued working, but the company no longer felt like a dream we were building together. It felt like a building filled with her absence. My doctors warned me that stress was damaging my heart. Rebecca had grown into a capable financial executive and the board wanted younger leadership. I agreed to retire and allowed professional managers to take over daily operations. Publicly, I announced that I had sold my remaining financial interest. Even Rebecca believed I had surrendered everything. But years earlier, Eleanor and I had created the Eleanor Thornton Stewardship Trust. It held a special class of founder shares with very little financial value but extraordinary voting authority. Those shares could block the sale of the company, the transfer of its core patents, the closure of the Ohio factory, or any decision that violated our medical mission. I did not tell Rebecca. At the time, I believed secrecy would protect her. I wanted her to lead without everyone assuming her father was standing behind every decision. For years, I never used those rights. Then one rainy Thursday morning, an envelope arrived at my home. Inside was a handwritten letter from an engineer named Nate Brooks. The first line read, "Mr. Thornton, I believe the company you built is about to place profit above patient safety." Beneath it, he had written one more sentence, "And I do not know who else is still powerful enough to stop it." Nate Brooks chose a diner 30 miles outside Columbus for our first meeting. It was the kind of place where truck drivers drank coffee before sunrise, and nobody paid attention to an old man sitting alone in a corner booth. Rain pressed against the windows, and the neon sign outside flickered every few seconds. I arrived early. The letter Nate had sent was folded inside my coat pocket. I had read it so many times that the creases had begun to tear. At exactly 7, a tall man in a dark work jacket entered, carrying a laptop bag. He looked younger than I had expected, perhaps 35, with tired eyes, and the nervous posture of someone who had spent weeks looking over his shoulder. He paused near the entrance. "Mr. Thornton," I gestured toward the seat across from me. Nate sat down but did not remove his jacket. "Thank you for coming," he said. "You took a risk contacting me. I did not know who else to trust." A waitress poured coffee. Neither of us spoke until she walked away. Then Nate opened his bag and placed 3 thick folders on the table. The first contained test reports for a new cardiac monitor called the Meridian Pulse Guard. According to the public presentations, Pulse Guard was faster, lighter, and cheaper than anything Thornton Meridian had produced before. Blake Harrington had described it as the product that would carry the company into its next generation. The reports Nate showed me told a different story. During long periods of continuous use, the battery compartment could overheat. In rooms with high humidity, a cheaper internal connector showed signs of corrosion. Most troubling of all, the alarm system occasionally delayed warnings when the device received several abnormal readings within a short period. "How long is the delay?" I asked. "In the worst test, 47 seconds.
I looked up from the page.
47 seconds could be the difference between a nurse reaching a patient in time and a family being told there was nothing more anyone could do. How many people have seen this? My immediate supervisor, 2 members of quality assurance, Blake's office, and what happened? The report was reclassified as preliminary. Nate opened another folder and showed me an edited version of the same test. The failures had been removed, only the successful trials remained. I felt an old anger rising in me, the same anger I had felt decades earlier while holding the failed relay from Susan Miller's monitor. Who authorized the changes I cannot prove Blake typed them himself, Nate said. But the order came from his office. We were told the launch schedule could not move. Why not? Because PulseGuard is part of Project North Star. That was the first time I heard the name. Nate lowered his voice. North Star is being presented to the board as a partnership with Whitmore Crest Capital. Blake says they will provide the money we need to modernize production. What does the agreement actually say? That is the problem. He opened his laptop and turned the screen toward me. The document contained more than 200 pages. Most board members would likely read the summary and rely on the company's attorneys for the rest. Nate had marked several sections. Whitmore Crest would receive exclusive control over Thornton Meridian's core patents. Manufacturing could be relocated without additional board approval. The Ohio plant could be closed after an 18-month transition period. Employee retention guarantees lasted only 6 months. After that, hundreds of people could be dismissed. The agreement also allowed Whitmore Crest to replace approved suppliers with lower-cost alternatives. I read the clauses twice. They are not investing in the company, I said. They are stripping it. Nate nodded. There is more. He showed me an internal spreadsheet listing projected labor reductions. Entire departments were marked for elimination, including assembly testing, maintenance, and domestic supply object management. Many of the workers had been with us for 20 or 30 years, people who had trained younger employees, people who had stayed during recessions, people Eleanor and I had once known by name. Why did you contact me? I asked. Nate hesitated. When I was hired, I found an old engineering manual in the archive room. Your notes were still written in the margins. On the last page there was an address and a sentence. I remembered it immediately. If the company ever asks you to ignore a danger, write to me. I had placed that note in a few technical manuals before retiring. At the time it had seemed almost foolishly dramatic. Now it was the reason I was sitting across from Nate.
I thought you had sold everything, he said, but I hoped you still knew someone who could help. I did not tell him about the trust. Not yet. Instead, I asked him to continue documenting everything and to make copies outside the company's network. 2 days later, I visited the Ohio plant.
I used the name of a retired contractor and wore an old visitor badge Patricia Caldwell had preserved from one of my previous inspections. The building had changed. The original brick entrance had been replaced by steel and glass. The lobby displayed awards for innovation and growth, but the photograph of Eleanor and me standing in front of our first workshop was gone. Most employees passed without recognizing me. That hurt more than I expected. But I reminded myself that recognition was not the reason I had come. Nate met me near the testing floor and pretended to explain the production line. We stopped beside a row of unfinished PulseGuard units. I examined the housing and noticed immediately that the battery ventilation openings were smaller than the ones shown in the approved design. Cost reduction, Nate whispered. Before I could answer, Blake's voice cut across the floor. Brooks. Every employee nearby became quiet. Blake approached with 2 managers behind him. His suit looked painfully expensive against the factory floor. I thought I told you to stop distracting the production team. I am showing a contract to the new line, Nate said. Blake looked at me briefly, then dismissed me with the expression people reserve for furniture. He turned back to Nate. The launch schedule is not a debate. We need employees who understand urgency, not engineers who hide behind endless testing. The battery issue has not been resolved. Several workers looked down. Blake smiled, but there was no warmth in it. You see problems because problems make you feel important. Then he raised his voice so everyone could hear. Progress always frightens people who know they cannot keep up. A few managers laughed. I watched Nate's jaw tighten. The company Eleanor and I built had once rewarded employees for stopping a production line when something felt wrong. Now a man was being humiliated for protecting patients. Later, near the executive elevators, I heard 2 managers discussing the North Star transition. Half these older technicians will be gone by next year, one said. They cost too much and complain about every change. The other laughed. Blake calls them legacy weight. Legacy weight. Those words stayed with me. As I turned the corner, I saw Rebecca. For one hopeful second, I thought my daughter might be pleased to see me. Instead, her face tightened with alarm. Dad, what are you doing here? I wanted to see the factory. You cannot just appear without calling. I used to come here every day. That was years ago. Her answer was sharper than she intended, but she did not take it back. She glanced around, worried someone might overhear us. The company is under enormous pressure, she said. This is not a good time for you to wander through production. I heard about Project North Star. Rebecca's expression changed. From whom? That matters less than whether you have read the complete agreement. I have reviewed the financial terms. That was not my question. She folded her arms. Blake and the legal team have handled the operational details. North Star may be our only chance to protect the company.
Protect it from what debt? Falling orders, rising costs, the possibility that we will not survive another year. I studied her face. Rebecca was frightened. That did not excuse her carelessness, but it told me something important. She did not know the entire plan. Did Blake tell you the Ohio plant could close? She looked away for half a second. There may be restructuring. Did he tell you hundreds of employees could lose their jobs? No final decisions have been made. Did he tell you Whitmore Crest can replace tested components without your approval? Her silence answered me. Rebecca lowered her voice. Dad, you left. You cannot return now and judge decisions you were not here to make. The words struck deeper than she knew, perhaps because part of them was true. Before I could respond, the elevator doors opened. Rebecca stepped inside and pressed the button for the executive floor. Go home, she said. Please. The doors closed between us.
As I walked toward the parking lot, Nate passed me near a service corridor. He did not stop. He simply pressed a small flash drive into my palm. That night I opened the files at home. There were original test results, internal emails, an unedited North Star agreement, and the full employee dismissal list. I scrolled slowly through the names. Then I saw one that made my blood run cold. Rebecca Thornton. My daughter was not Blake's partner. She was one of his planned casualties. I barely slept that night. Rebecca's name remained on my computer screen long after I had finished reading every other file Nate had given me. The dismissal list was not a rough projection. It was organized by department salary and proposed termination date. Beside Rebecca's name was a note that read, "Retain through transition, then replace after financial integration." Blake had never intended to reward her loyalty. He had intended to use it. Before sunrise, I copied the files onto 2 encrypted drives, printed the most important pages, and placed everything inside the worn leather briefcase Eleanor had given me so many years earlier. At 8 o'clock, I called Patricia Caldwell. Patricia had been our corporate attorney before Thornton Meridian could afford an internal legal department. She had helped Eleanor and me incorporate the company, negotiate our first major contracts, and build legal protections around our medical mission. She was 69 now and officially retired, although retirement had never suited her. When I told her what I had found, she did not sound surprised. Bring everything, she said. And Peggy, do not contact your daughter yet. She may be in danger. She may also be the reason your authority no longer exists. The words cut deeper than I wanted to admit.
Patricia's office was located above a quiet bookstore in downtown Columbus. She preferred old wooden shelves and paper files to the mirrored towers where most corporate attorneys worked. When I arrived, she was standing beside a long conference table with reading glasses resting low on her nose. She looked at the briefcase. You still carry that thing Eleanor would haunt me if I replaced it. Patricia smiled briefly, but the warmth vanished when I handed her the documents.
For almost 2 hours she read without speaking. She compared the North Star agreement to the company charter, examined the edited test results, and studied the emails between Blake and Lauren Whitmore. Finally she leaned back. This is serious, she said. But serious is not the same as legally sufficient. What more do we need? To activate your stewardship authority, we must establish 3 things. She raised one finger. First, that Project North Star violates the company's founding medical mission. A second finger. Second, that material safety information was intentionally withheld from the board. Then a third. And finally, that the founder shares remain valid and enforceable. They do. Do you have the original documents? I placed my hand on the briefcase. Every one of them. Inside were the original founder share certificates, the Eleanor Thornton Stewardship Trust, the restrictions on patent transfers and emergency voting proxy, and the earliest board resolutions, defining the company's safety obligations. Eleanor had insisted that I keep the originals in my personal custody. At the time I thought she was being overly cautious. Digital records are convenient, she once told me, but convenience is not the same as permanence.
Patricia opened the briefcase carefully. The old leather released a faint smell of paper dust and time. She lifted the trust document first. This gives you veto authority over any sale, merger, factory closure, patent transfer, or abandonment of the original medical purpose, she said. But Blake's attorneys will not simply accept it. They will not have a choice. They may, if this is valid. She turned her laptop toward me.
On the screen was a corporate resolution dated 2 years earlier. The document declared that I had voluntarily surrendered all remaining stewardship rights and approved the conversion of the founder shares into ordinary non-voting shares. At the bottom was Rebecca's electronic signature. For a moment I could not breathe. I read the name twice. Rebecca Thornton. The signature was followed by her title as Chief Financial Officer and a digital authentication stamp. Where did you get this? It was filed in the company's internal governance system 18 months ago, Patricia said. I found it after searching the public transaction summaries attached to North Star. I never signed anything. The resolution claims your consent was obtained through Rebecca as authorized family representative. She had no authority to surrender my shares, not unless another document granted it. Patricia opened a second file. It was a power of attorney I had signed during a cardiac procedure 3 years earlier. It allowed Rebecca to manage routine financial matters if I became temporarily incapacitated. The resolution cited that document as its legal foundation. I stared at the screen. Rebecca knew that power of attorney was limited. Perhaps. You think she did this. I think anger is making you reach a conclusion before we have evidence. I stood and walked toward the window.
Below us, people moved along the sidewalk, carrying coffee and shopping bags. Their lives seemed painfully ordinary compared with the betrayal unfolding inside that room. Rebecca and I had not been close since Eleanor died. Grief had changed us in opposite ways. Rebecca became more driven. I withdrew. She believed I did not trust her to lead the company. I believed giving her space was an act of love. Perhaps we had both mistaken distance for respect.
I remembered the way she had looked at me in the factory. You left. You cannot return now and judge decisions you are not here to make. Had she signed away my authority because she believed it was the only way to escape my shadow, Patricia came to stand beside me. Listen to me carefully, she said. The signature may be genuine, but that does not mean she knowingly approved this document. What makes you say that? The date. She pointed to the electronic timestamp. Rebecca's signature had been recorded at 11:43 p.m. on a Sunday. The document itself had been uploaded into the system 2 days later. That is possible, I said. It is possible, Patricia agreed, but unusual. She showed me another detail. The certificate listed a software version that the company had not begun using until 6 months after the supposed signing date. My anger gave way to something colder. Someone altered it. Someone may have copied her authentication credentials from another package. Can we prove that with access to the audit trail? Blake controls the system. Then we need a preservation order before he has reason to destroy anything. The emergency board vote was scheduled for the following morning. We had less than 24 hours. Patricia began making calls to a judge, a digital forensics specialist, and a retired corporate records examiner. While she worked, I sat alone with Eleanor's trust document open before me. Tucked between 2 pages was a small card I had not seen in years. Eleanor's handwriting covered the front. Power is only honourable when it protects people who have none. I read the sentence several times.
That briefcase had carried its loan rejections contracts, engineering plans, and hospital letters. It had sat beside Eleanor during the first board meeting in our garage. Now it held the only documents capable of stopping the company from betraying everything she had believed. By late afternoon, Patricia had arranged for me to attend the meeting as the unnamed representative of the Stewardship Trust.
The board has been told a trust representative will appear before the vote, she said. They do not know it is you. Does Blake know? She advised me to use the private entrance reserved for directors. She offered to send a car and meet me inside. I refused. Peggy, this is not the time for pride. It is not pride. Then what is it? I want to see how they treat someone they believe has no title. Patricia studied me for a long moment. You may not like the answer. I already suspect I will not. That evening I took the briefcase home and placed it on the kitchen table where Eleanor and I had once reviewed our first invoices. The leather was cracked. One corner had been repaired twice. The brass locks had lost their shine. I polished them anyway. Then I arranged the documents in the order I might need them. Founder certificates, trust instrument, patent restrictions, emergency proxy, Eleanor's notarized letter, the card with a handwritten message. Before closing the lid, I placed Nate's flash drive beside them. I stood there with my hands resting on the worn leather and thought about Rebecca. I did not know whether my daughter had betrayed me. I did not know whether Blake had stolen her signature, but I knew that by the next morning one of us would lose control of the company forever. I closed the briefcase and heard the brass locks click into place. For the first time since Eleanor's funeral, I felt as though she was standing beside me, not asking me to reclaim my throne, asking me to keep our promise. The next morning I entered Thornton Meridian Medical Systems, through the same front doors every visitor used. The lobby looked colder than I remembered. Sunlight reflected off the glass walls, white marble floors, and silver company logo mounted behind the reception desk. Everything was polished enough to impress investors, yet almost nothing remained from the company Eleanor and I had built. The young receptionist looked at my faded charcoal suit, then at the worn leather briefcase in my hand. "Can I help you, sir? I am here for the emergency board meeting." Her smile tightened. "Do you have an appointment?"
I was invited as a representative of the Stewardship Trust. She searched her computer. I do not see a name. You will not. Two young executives standing near the elevators glanced in my direction. One whispered something about my briefcase looking older than the building. The other laughed and asked whether I had come to repair the furniture. I heard every word.
Years earlier, Eleanor would have squeezed my hand and reminded me that cruelty often reveals more about the speaker than the target. But Eleanor was gone and I had to stand there alone. The receptionist called security. Before the guard arrived, Rebecca stepped from the elevator. She wore a navy suit and carried a folder against her chest. Her face changed the moment she saw me. "Dad." The executives stopped laughing. Rebecca hurried toward me. "What are you doing here?" "I told you I had questions about North Star. This is a closed board meeting." "I know." She looked at the briefcase. "You cannot walk into a corporate vote carrying old papers and expect everyone to stop. I am not asking them to stop because the papers are old." Her voice dropped. "Please go home. Blake is already under pressure, and if you create a scene, it will make everything worse. You are worried I will embarrass you. I am worried you do not understand what is happening." I looked at my daughter and saw exhaustion beneath her careful makeup. "You may understand less than you think." The elevator doors opened again. Blake Harrington stepped out with Lauren Whitmore beside him. Blake wore a dark, tailored suit and the confident expression of a man who believed the outcome had already been purchased. Lauren's eyes moved over me quickly. "Who is this?" she asked. "My father," Rebecca said. Blake smiled. "The retired engineer." "The man who founded this company," I corrected. His smile widened as if I had made a charming joke. "Yes, of course." The historical connection. He glanced at the briefcase. "That thing belongs in a museum." The executives behind him laughed again. Blake turned to the security guard. "Please escort Mr. Thornton out. We have a $1 billion decision to make." I did not move. I was invited by the Stewardship Trust. For the first time uncertainty crossed his face. Only for a second. Then he recovered. "Fine," he said. "Let him observe. Perhaps it will give him some closure." Rebecca caught my arm as we entered the elevator. "Do not interrupt," she whispered. "I will speak only when necessary. That is what frightens me." The boardroom occupied the top floor overlooking Columbus through walls of glass. 12 directors sat around a long black table. Several legal advisors and financial consultants occupied chairs along the walls. A place card at the far end read, "Stewardship Trust Representative." I sat there and placed the briefcase beside my chair. No one asked my name. That told me Patricia had kept her promise. Blake opened the meeting with a rehearsed expression of concern. "Thornton Meridian faces the most serious financial crisis in its history." Lauren activated the screen behind him. Charts appeared showing falling revenue, rising manufacturing costs, and debt obligations approaching dangerous levels. According to the presentation, the company had less than 6 months before it risked violating its lending agreements. Project North Star, Lauren explained, would provide immediate capital, protect the brand, and preserve a meaningful number of jobs. She did not define meaningful. Blake spoke about courage, modernization, and the responsibility to make difficult choices. I listened until he called the transaction the only possible path forward. Then I raised my hand. Blake looked irritated. "Yes, what is the maximum internal temperature recorded during the Pulse Guard battery stress test?" Silence followed. Blake looked toward the head of product development. The man shifted in his chair. "That level of technical detail is not relevant to today's transaction. It is relevant if Pulse Guard is the product supporting your revenue forecast." Lauren leaned forward. "The product has passed all required internal reviews." That was not my question. Blake's jaw tightened. "The final temperature readings are confidential. I designed the original thermal tolerance standards used by this company. I am asking whether the battery exceeded them." Rebecca looked at me sharply. One director turned toward Blake. "Did it?" Blake ignored him. I asked another question. "Why is the high humidity connector test missing from the board report?" The head of product development lowered his eyes. Lauren answered this time. "Preliminary failures were determined to be statistically insignificant. How many failures? She hesitated. I continued. What was the longest delay between an abnormal cardiac reading and the audible warning? No one answered. 47 seconds, I said. The room changed. A physician who served on the board leaned forward. That cannot be correct. It is in the original test data. Blake placed both hands on the table.
This meeting is about financing, not an old engineer's personal theories. Patient safety is not a personal theory. He gave a short laugh. With respect, Mr. Foe gave a short laugh. With respect, Mr. Thornton, the medical technology industry has changed since you worked here. We cannot allow outdated thinking to destroy thousands of livelihoods. You are asking these people to vote using incomplete information, R. Enton. The medical technology industry has changed since you worked here. We cannot allow outdated thinking to destroy thousands of livelihoods. You are asking these people to vote using incomplete information. I am asking them to save the company. A board member named Charles Grant cleared his throat.
Perhaps we should hear from someone in engineering. Blake resisted, but another director supported the request. The board secretary opened the door. Nate Brooks entered carrying a folder. He looked nervous, yet he kept his shoulders straight. Blake stared at him. What is he doing here? I requested technical testimony, Charles said. Nate took the empty chair near the screen. He explained the battery overheating, the corrosion risk, and the delayed alarms. Before he could finish, Blake interrupted. Mr. Brooks has repeatedly opposed the launch schedule. His concerns have been reviewed by qualified managers. They were not resolved, Nate said. They were addressed. They were removed from the report. A murmur moved around the table. Blake's face hardened. This employee is disgruntled because his recommendations were rejected. Nate opened his folder. I brought the original results. Lauren whispered something to one of her attorneys. Blake stood. This is becoming a performance. We have a deadline from our lenders, and every minute we delay increases the risk to the company. He distributed voting sheets. I am calling the question. Rebecca looked from Blake to Nate, then to me. For the first time, doubt appeared openly on her face. I asked her quietly, did you know about the 47-second delay? She did not answer. Blake began naming directors for the vote. Before the first response could be recorded, I stood. This vote cannot proceed. Blake slammed his hand against the table. You have no authority here. I believe that is what you were told. He turned towards security. Remove him. The guard approached me reluctantly. I lifted the worn leather briefcase and placed it in the center of the table. The room became quiet. Blake shook his head.
Whatever sentimental papers you brought, they do not change current corporate law. I rested my fingers on the tarnished brass locks. These papers created the law governing this company. The first lock clicked, then the second. I opened the lid. On top lay the original founder share certificates, their blue seals still intact. Beneath them rested the Eleanor Thornton Stewardship Trust, the original corporate charter, the patent restrictions, and the emergency voting proxy.
I placed each document on the table. Then I removed an old photograph of Eleanor and me standing outside our garage beside the first 12 monitors we had ever built. Rebecca stared at it. Patricia Caldwell entered the boardroom with a licensed notary and a corporate records examiner. Blake's face lost its colour. Patricia placed her legal case on the table. For the record, she said, the gentleman standing before you is Peggy Thornton, the surviving founder of Thornton Meridian Medical Systems and the controlling stewardship shareholder. No one laughed. Patricia held up the trust instrument. These founder shares carry veto authority over any sale, merger, core patents, transfer, domestic factory closure, or transaction that changes the company's medical mission. Lauren turned to her attorneys. One of them began reading the documents with trembling hands. I looked around the room. You were prepared to sell the future of this company without knowing who still controlled it. Rebecca whispered, Dad, why did you never tell me? Before I could answer, Blake recovered. He opened a folder and pulled out a printed resolution. This is theatre, he said. Mr. Thornton surrendered those rights 2 years ago. He placed the document beside the trust. At the bottom was Rebecca's electronic signature. Patricia's expression remained still. Rebecca picked up the resolution. Her eyes moved across the page, growing wider with every line. Blake pointed toward her name. The chief financial officer approved the conversion of the founder shares. The stewardship trust has no remaining authority. Every person in the room turned toward my daughter. Rebecca stared at the signature. Then she looked at Blake. Her voice was barely audible. I never signed this. Rebecca's words seemed to remain suspended above the boardroom table. I never signed this. Blake Harrington did not look surprised. That was the first thing I noticed. A falsely accused man usually reacts with confusion or anger. Blake reacted like someone watching a familiar obstacle appear exactly where he expected it. He adjusted his cuffs and gave Rebecca a patient smile. You may not remember every document you approved during the refinancing process. Rebecca held the resolution with both hands. I would remember signing away my father's rights. You approved hundreds of pages that quarter. Not this. Lauren Whitmore leaned toward her attorney and whispered something. The attorney immediately began gathering the North Star documents into a neat stack. Patricia noticed. No materials leave this room, she said. Lauren looked up. You have no authority to seize our property. Patricia removed a folded document from her legal case. As of 7:30 this morning, the Franklin County Court of Common Pleas issued an emergency preservation order covering all records connected to Project North Star, the founder share conversion, pulse guard testing, and communications involving Whitmore Crest Capital. She placed copies in front of Blake and Lauren. Deletion, removal, alteration, or concealment of any relevant record may be treated as contempt of court and destruction of evidence. The colour drained from Lauren's face. Blake remained calm, but one of his hands tightened around the edge of the table. This is absurd, he said. The company faces a financial emergency and now a retired founder is using sentimental influence to delay its rescue. I looked at the financial charts still glowing on the screen. Then proving the emergency should be easy. Patricia nodded to the board secretary. Disconnect this room from the company network. No remote access until the forensic team secures the systems.
Blake stood. You cannot shut down our operations. We are not shutting down operations, Patricia replied. We are preserving the evidence you claim will prove your innocence. The board voted to suspend the North Star decision until the signature and financial claims could be verified. 10 directors supported the delay. 2 abstained. Blake did not vote. He was too busy watching Rebecca, not with fear, with calculation.
Within an hour, a digital forensics team arrived. They imaged the executive servers, secured the company's signing platform, and collected the laptops belonging to Blake, Rebecca, the general counsel, and the North Star project manager. Rebecca surrendered hers without argument. Blake objected until Patricia reminded him that
Refusal would be recorded for the court. Nate provided the original pulse guard testing files and identified the edited reports distributed to the board.
The meeting moved to a smaller conference room while the specialists began their work. Rebecca sat across from me, pale and silent. I wanted to comfort her. I also wanted to demand answers. Instead, I asked the most important question. Did you give Blake access to your electronic signature? No. Did anyone in his office help manage your approval requests? Rebecca closed her eyes.
My executive assistant was transferred 3 months ago. Blake assigned someone from corporate strategy to help with North Star. What was his name? Daniel Mercer. Patricia wrote it down. Did Daniel ever ask you to log into the signing platform while he was present? Rebecca hesitated. There was one evening during the refinancing. We had more than 40 documents due before midnight. The system kept timing out. Daniel called information technology and said they needed to reset my authentication token. Did you give him your password? No, but he took my laptop to the technical office for about 20 minutes. Blake gave a dismissive laugh. You are inventing suspicion because you regret a decision. Rebecca turned toward him. I did not sign that resolution. You were overwhelmed. People forget. I remember you telling me my father's remaining interests were purely ceremonial. Blake's expression changed slightly. You misunderstood. No, she said. You wanted me to believe that he had no power. The forensic examiner returned just before noon. His name was Marcus Hill, a former federal investigator with a voice so calm that everyone became quieter when he spoke.
The resolution's signature certificate is inconsistent with the stated signing date, he said. Patricia asked him to explain. The authentication record identifies software version 8.4. That version was not installed at Thornton Meridian until 6 months after the date printed on the document. A board member frowned. Could the system have updated the certificate later, not in the manner shown here? Marcus placed a technical report on the table. We also found that the document was not created 2 years ago. Its earliest recoverable version appeared on the server 11 months ago. Rebecca stared at Blake. That was when North Star began. Marcus continued. The signature image and encryption token were copied from a legitimate refinancing agreement signed by Ms. Thornton. The copied credentials were then attached to the founder share resolution. Who created it? I asked. The initial file was generated under an administrator account assigned to Daniel Mercer. Rebecca covered her mouth. Where is Daniel? Blake answered too quickly. He resigned last week. Patricia turned to him. Where did he go? I do not manage the private lives of former employees. Marcus opened another folder. The account was used from a computer registered to the chief executive office. Every eye moved toward Blake. He leaned back in his chair. Several employees used that office. Your laptop was connected to the same internal address at the time the file was created, Marcus said. That proves proximity, not involvement. He was right about one thing. It was not yet enough to prove that Blake had personally created the forged resolution. But the investigation had only begun. The financial records became even more disturbing.
The crisis presented to the board had not been invented entirely. Thornton Meridian did face declining orders and rising costs, but Blake had made the situation appear far worse. A large hospital payment had been moved into the following quarter, making current revenue look lower. Maintenance expenses scheduled over 12 months had been recorded immediately. A temporary credit line had been described as unavailable even though the bank had already approved its renewal.
Most damaging of all, Blake's team had delayed 3 profitable contracts until after the North Star vote. He had not created the storm. He had darkened the sky so the board would accept the shelter he intended to sell them. Rebecca read the financial analysis with tears gathering in her eyes. These numbers came through my department. They were prepared beneath your signature, Patricia said. I should have caught them. Yes, I said. Rebecca looked at me as if she had expected me to defend her. I could not. You trusted Blake, I continued. But you were the chief financial officer. Trust did not remove your responsibility to verify what you presented. Her voice broke. I thought I was saving the company. I believe you. Do you? Yes. But good intentions do not erase negligence. The words hurt both of us. For years I had wanted Rebecca to know that I respected her as a leader. Now in the moment she needed her father most, I had to speak to her as the officer whose failure had nearly destroyed thousands of livelihoods. She wiped her eyes. What happens to me, that will be decided after we understand everything. Blake looked almost pleased by the distance between us. You see, he said to Rebecca, your father did not return to protect you. He returned to take control. I turned toward him. If I wanted control, I would have used my authority years ago. You hid it from everyone. Yes, that was a mistake I could no longer deny. I looked at the board. My secrecy gave Blake room to tell people the founder protections no longer mattered. It also left my daughter vulnerable to manipulation. I believed silence would free her from my shadow. Instead, it created darkness in which other people could operate. Rebecca lowered her gaze. Patricia's phone rang. She listened for less than a minute, then asked Marcus to connect a recovered mailbox archive to the screen. Several deleted emails appeared. The first was from Blake to Lauren. Once the founder conversion is accepted, no remaining party can block patent transfer or closure of the Ohio facility. The second discussed the executive transition schedule. Keep Thornton through regulatory approval. Remove her before employee announcement. Her family name makes her useful until then. Rebecca read the message twice. Blake's voice became harsh. Those emails lacked context. The third email contained an attached compensation agreement. Blake would receive $28 million if North Star closed successfully. Lauren would gain exclusive acquisition rights to the Pulse Guard patents. The room erupted. Directors demanded Blake's resignation. Lauren's attorneys advised her not to answer questions. Security moved closer to the doors. I raised my hand for silence. We are not finished. I opened the leather briefcase and removed a sealed cream-coloured envelope. Rebecca stared at it. What is that? Something your mother and I prepared 15 years ago. Blake gave another bitter laugh. Another antique? No, I said. A way to save this company without selling its future. I placed the envelope in front of Patricia. Outside the glass walls, employees had begun gathering in the hallway, watching through the blinds as the people above them decided whether their jobs, their factory, and the work of their lives would survive. Patricia broke the seal. Inside was a plan Eleanor had once called our final safeguard. And for the first time that day, Blake Harrington looked truly afraid. Patricia unfolded the papers from Eleanor's sealed envelope and arranged them across the table.
The first page was dated 15 years earlier. At the top were the words Thornton Meridian Continuity and Public Benefit Plan. Blake leaned forward. This cannot possibly be relevant. It is the most relevant document in this room, Patricia said. The plan had been created after a recession nearly forced us to sell the company. Eleanor and I had feared that one day Thornton Meridian might again face a crisis large enough to make surrender seem reasonable, so we had prepared another path. The document authorized the Stewardship Trust to form a non-profit medical alliance with regional hospitals, credit unions, charitable foundations, and employee retirement funds. If the company faced a forced sale that threatened its mission, the alliance could purchase a temporary, controlling interest, refinance the debt, and preserve the domestic factory. The plan had never been activated, until now.
Patricia displayed letters from 3 non-profit hospital networks in Ohio, Indiana, and Pennsylvania.
Each had agreed to join the alliance if Thornton Meridian suspended the Pulse Guard launch, corrected the safety defects, and accepted independent oversight. A statewide healthcare foundation had pledged emergency capital. A local credit union consortium had offered to refinance the company's most urgent debt.
Most important, 12 hospital systems had signed conditional purchase commitments for a corrected version of PulseGuard. Charles Grant removed his glasses. How much funding are we discussing? $210 million in immediate financing, Patricia said. Another $140 million becomes available after the safety review. Lauren Whitmore's expression hardened. That is far less than our offer. It is enough to keep the company independent, I said.
She gave me a cold smile. Independent and weak. Independent and responsible. Blake stood at the head of the table. This fantasy requires months of negotiating. We have days. Patricia turned another page. Preliminary negotiations are complete. He looked at me. You arranged this behind the board's back. I revived a plan my wife and I created before you ever entered this building. Ons. We have days. Patricia turned another page. Preliminary negotiations are complete. He looked at me. You arranged this behind the board's back. I revived a plan my wife and I created before you ever entered this building. You had no right. I placed the founder certificate beside the trust.
My rights are the reason Project North Star cannot proceed. Then I spoke the words Blake had believed he would never hear. As controlling stewardship shareholder, I formally veto the sale of Thornton Meridian Medical Systems, the transfer of its core patents, and the closure of the Ohio manufacturing facility. The boardroom became completely silent. Lauren closed her folder. If the transaction is vetoed, Whitmore Crest will withdraw every offer. That is your right. You will regret this. Perhaps I said. But patients will not pay for our regret with their lives. She signaled to her attorneys and walked toward the door. Before leaving, she stopped beside Rebecca. You could have had a future with us. Rebecca looked at the dismissal list still lying on the table. You plan to remove me. Lauren did not answer. The door closed behind her. Blake remained standing. He seemed unable to accept that the room no longer belonged to him. You cannot run this company, he said to me. You are 76 years old. You have been gone for years. Technology moved forward while you sat at home protecting memories. I am not returning to run it. That answer unsettled him more than anger would have. You expect us to believe this is not a personal takeover. I did not come back for the throne. I turned toward the board. I came back because the people sitting in these chairs were denied the truth. The employees outside these walls were treated as disposable, and patients were placed at risk so a few executives could collect money. Blake pointed at the open briefcase. You hid your authority from everyone. That makes you no better. He had found the one accusation I could not dismiss. You are right about one thing, I said. My secrecy was wrong. Rebecca looked at me. I believed hidden power was safer than visible interference. Instead, it created confusion, resentment, and opportunity for manipulation. I accept responsibility for that. Blake's mouth curved into a bitter smile. Then step aside. No. The board chairman asked Patricia to read the emergency governance provisions. Because the company faced possible fraud safety violations and destruction of shareholder rights, the stewardship trust could suspend officers involved in the disputed transaction until an independent investigation was completed. I looked directly at Blake. Effective immediately, you are suspended as chief executive officer. He laughed. You cannot be serious. You will surrender your building access company devices and authority over all employees. Blake looked around the table for support. No one spoke. Even the directors who had defended North Star avoided his eyes. Security entered. The same guard who had approached me in the lobby stood beside Blake now. His expression was professional, but I saw recognition in it. Blake gathered his papers slowly. As he passed me, he stopped. This company will collapse without me. Then it was already weaker than you claimed. Security escorted him from the boardroom.
Through the glass wall, employees watched him cross the executive floor. Some stepped aside, others remained still. No one applauded. That mattered to me. Justice should not become humiliation simply because the guilty once humiliated others. After Blake left, the board appointed an interim leadership committee. Patricia recommended 3 independent directors, the head of clinical safety, and 1 employee representative. Then Charles asked the question everyone had been avoiding.
What happens to Rebecca? My daughter sat motionless. I had spent the entire morning protecting her from a forged signature. But protecting her from fraud did not mean protecting her from consequences. She cannot remain chief financial officer, I said. Rebecca closed her eyes. A quiet sadness moved through me, but I continued.
She presented financial information she did not fully verify. She allowed Blake's office too much control over her department. Even though she was deceived, her position carried responsibilities she failed to meet. The board voted to remove her as CFO. She accepted the decision without argument. Patricia suggested she be dismissed entirely. Rebecca looked at me, but she did not ask for mercy. That made my next words harder.
I believe she should be allowed to remain as a senior financial advisor under independent supervision with no signing authority. One director objected. Why give her another chance? Because accountability and destruction are not the same thing. I looked at Rebecca. She will have to earn trust through work transparency and humility. Her name will not protect her. Neither will mine. Rebecca nodded slowly. I understand. Nate Brooks was appointed acting director of clinical safety. When his name was announced, he looked startled. I am not an executive, he said. That may be one of your qualifications, I replied. His first responsibility would be to stop pulse guard production, reopen testing, and establish an anonymous reporting system that no executive could override. The board also approved the non-profit alliance and authorized Patricia to complete the emergency financing. By late afternoon, the employees gathered on the factory floor. I stood on a small platform with the briefcase resting near my feet. Rebecca, Nate, and several board members stood behind me. Most workers had learned who I was. Some looked curious, others looked angry. They had every right to be. I will not promise that nothing will change, I told them. The company is in trouble and recovery will require sacrifice, but the Ohio factory will remain open. The patents will remain with Thornton Meridian. No employee will be dismissed under the North Star plan. A woman near the front began crying. An older technician raised his hand. Are you coming back as CEO? No. A murmur moved through the crowd. I helped build this company, I continued, but that does not mean I should own its future forever. My role is to protect the conditions under which better leaders can emerge. I asked Nate to step forward. Many employees recognized him as the engineer Blake had mocked publicly. He stopped a dangerous product from reaching hospital rooms, I said. This company once rewarded that kind of courage. It will do so again. The applause began quietly. Then it spread across the factory. Nate lowered his head overwhelmed. Rebecca stood a few feet away listening as employees applauded someone she had once ignored. I saw pain in her face, but I also saw understanding beginning to replace pride. After the gathering, she approached me near the loading dock quay. You knew I was on the dismissal list. I saw pain in her face, but I also saw understanding beginning to replace pride. After the gathering, she approached me near the loading dock. You knew I was on the dismissal list. Yes, and you still removed me as CFO. I did. Tears filled her eyes. I do not know whether to thank you or hate you. You may need time for both. She looked at the briefcase. Mom would have handled this better. Your mother handled nearly everything better. Rebecca almost smiled. Then she asked, do you still trust me? I considered lying because I loved her. Instead, I gave her the truth. Not yet. She absorbed the words and nodded. Then I will work until you do. As the sun lowered behind the factory windows, I watched my daughter walk back inside without an executive title, without special authority, and without certainty that she would ever regain either. For the first time in years, she was not walking in my shadow. She was beginning to choose her own direction. 6 months after the emergency board meeting, I returned to Thornton Meridian carrying the same worn leather briefcase. This time no one called security.
The receptionist stood when I entered the lobby. Good morning, Mr. Thornton. Good morning. Behind her, the Silver Company logo remained on the wall, but a framed photograph had been added beside it. It showed Eleanor and me outside our first garage standing beside 12 handmade cardiac monitors and looking much younger than either of us had understood. Beneath the photograph were Eleanor's words, every decision made here must remember the patient who cannot enter this room.
I stood before it longer than I intended. The company had survived, although survival had not been simple. Project North Star was dead. Whitmore Crest Capital had withdrawn its offer and filed a lawsuit claiming the company had interfered with a lawful transaction. Patricia responded with evidence of forged documents, undisclosed compensation, and attempted patent acquisition through fraud. The lawsuit disappeared within 3 weeks. Lauren Whitmore agreed to cooperate with investigators in exchange for reduced civil penalties. Her testimony showed that Blake had designed the crisis almost a year before the board vote. He had delayed contracts, manipulated expense schedules, and pressured managers to change the pulse guard reports. Daniel Mercer, the administrator who had copied Rebecca's digital credentials, was found in Florida. He admitted that Blake had promised him a senior position after the acquisition. Blake was charged with fraud, forgery, destruction of corporate records, and conspiracy to conceal safety information. I never attended his hearing. Some people expected me to sit in the courtroom and watch him fall. They believed justice would feel incomplete unless I saw fear on his face. But I had learned something during my years with Eleanor. Justice does not require us to enjoy another person's suffering. It requires us to stop the harm, reveal the truth, and protect those who might be hurt next. The Pulse Guard launch had been delayed for 5 months. Nate led a complete redesign of the battery system, restored the original ventilation specifications, and replaced the corroding connectors. He also created an independent safety office that reported directly to the board rather than the chief executive. Any employee could now stop production if a serious risk appeared. No manager could punish that employee without an outside review. When the corrected Pulse Guard completed hospital trials, its alarm response was faster than any previous Thornton Meridian monitor. The first order came from Margaret Collins Regional Hospital, named after the nursing director who had purchased our first 6 machines decades earlier. I stood beside Nate when the contract arrived. "You did this," I told him. "We did it," he replied.
No. I protected your opportunity to do it. That is not the same thing. Nate had grown more confident, but he had not become arrogant. He still walked the production floor every morning and asked technicians what frightened them about the device. Eleanor would have trusted him. The financial recovery was slower. The non-profit alliance provided emergency capital, but every department had to reduce unnecessary spending. Executive bonuses were suspended. Private transportation contracts were cancelled. The top floor dining room was converted into a training centre. For the first time in years, cuts began above the factory floor rather than below it. No production worker lost a job.
Some employees accepted shorter weeks for 2 months. Senior managers took temporary salary reductions. Hospital partners accelerated payments. Local suppliers agreed to extend credit because closing Thornton Meridian would have harmed their own workers. The company survived because hundreds of people accepted small sacrifices instead of forcing a few people to lose everything. Rebecca played an important role in that recovery. She no longer had a private office. Her desk stood in the financial operations department beside junior analysts and payroll staff. Every report she prepared required independent review. She had no authority to approve transfers, sign contracts, or present financial forecasts to the board without supervision. The humiliation was visible, but she never complained.
She arrived before most employees and often remained after dark. She reviewed every invoice Blake's team had manipulated. She met with department leaders and apologized for repeating financial claims she had failed to verify. Some forgave her quickly, others did not. Rebecca accepted both. One afternoon, I found her in a small conference room surrounded by old accounting records. "You missed lunch," I said. "So did you. I am retired. I am allowed to forget." She smiled faintly.
On the table was a report showing that the company could repay the emergency financing 2 years earlier than expected. "You found the supplier overcharges," I said. "There were several," she replied. "Blake's team approved contracts with companies connected to North Star Consultants. Did you send this to the auditors an hour ago?" I looked through the report. It was careful, transparent, and supported by documentation. "You did good work." Rebecca became very still.
It was the first praise I'd given her since the board meeting. "Do you mean that as a shareholder or as my father?" "Both." Her eyes filled with tears, but she looked down before they could fall. "I spent most of my career trying to prove I was not here because of your name," she said. "Then Blake made me feel as though your name was the only useful thing about me. I helped create that fear. You left me alone with it." Yes. The admission no longer felt like surrender.
It felt like truth. Rebecca looked at me. "I was angry after Mom died. You disappeared into that house and called it retirement. I thought you had abandoned the company and me. I believed you wanted freedom from me. I wanted you to trust me. I did trust you. I simply never learned how to say it without interfering." She wiped her eyes. "We lost a lot of years. We did. Can we get them back? No." The answer hurt her, but I continued. "We can stop losing the ones we still have." A week later, the board approved a permanent governance reform. The founder shares would no longer remain hidden under my private control. They were transferred into the Eleanor Thornton Stewardship Foundation, an independent non-profit trust governed by 7 people. 2 seats belonged to medical professionals. 2 belonged to employees elected by their co-workers. 1 belonged to a patient advocate. 1 belonged to an independent ethics director. The final seat belonged to a member of the Thornton family, but no family member could hold it automatically. Even Rebecca would have to earn the nomination. The foundation retained the power to block unsafe products, patent stripping destructive factory closures and sales that violated the company's mission. No single person would ever again control the future in secrecy. Not Blake, not Rebecca, not even me. At the Foundation's first public meeting, I carried the leather briefcase to the original workshop building, which had been restored as a training centre. Employees, nurses, community leaders, and hospital representatives filled the room. Rebecca sat in the second row. Nate stood near the first pulse guard unit approved for shipment. I placed the briefcase on a wooden table. For 46 years, I said this case carried the papers people believed gave me power. I opened it. There were no share certificates inside, no veto documents, no emergency proxy. The briefcase was empty except for one envelope. I removed it and called Rebecca forward. She approached slowly. "This belongs to you," I said. She opened the envelope. Inside was a letter Eleanor had written shortly before her death. Rebecca read the first line silently. Then she pressed one hand over her mouth. I asked whether she wanted privacy. She shook her head and read the final paragraph aloud. "My dear daughter, a company is not inherited like jewellery or land. It is borrowed from every person whose life depends on the choices made inside it. Never ask whether you deserve to own what we built. Ask whether you are prepared to protect what others still need." The room remained silent. Rebecca folded the letter carefully. "I am not ready for the Foundation seat," she said. Several people looked surprised. She continued, "But I hope one day I will be." I nodded. "That is the first answer that tells me you may become ready." Then I pushed the empty briefcase toward her. She touched the worn leather. "Why give me this if the documents are gone because your mother never bought it to carry power?" I remembered Eleanor standing in our kitchen placing our first rejected proposal inside. She bought it to remind me that every document affects someone's life. Rebecca lifted the briefcase. It looked different in her hands, not like an inheritance, like a responsibility. That evening, after everyone left, I walked through the training centre alone. The folding table from our garage stood behind glass. Beside it sat one of the original 12 monitors. I could almost hear Eleanor arguing with me about component prices. I could almost see Rebecca sleeping beneath the table while we worked. For years I believed controlling the company's future meant keeping the right papers close enough to stop the wrong people.
But control was never the same as stewardship. Control protects possession. Stewardship protects purpose. As I turned off the lights, Rebecca waited by the door with the briefcase in her hand. "Ready to go home, Dad?" I looked once more at the workshop Eleanor and I had built from hope, fear, borrowed money, and a promise to strangers we would never meet. "Yes," I said. This time when we walked away from the company, neither of us was leaving the other behind.
Looking back, I understand that the most dangerous kind of power is not always held by the loudest person in the room. Sometimes it is hidden in old documents, family expectations, silence, or trust that has never been questioned. I believed I was protecting Rebecca by hiding my authority. In truth, I deprived her of knowledge she needed and left room for someone dishonest to shape the story in my absence. Rebecca also learned that intelligence and good intentions are not enough. Leadership requires the courage to verify uncomfortable facts, challenge people we admire, and accept responsibility when our trust causes harm. Blake believed the company existed to reward whoever could control it. Eleanor understood something deeper. A business that affects human lives belongs in a moral sense to every person depending on its honesty. That lesson reaches far beyond corporate boardrooms. Families can make the same mistake. Parents sometimes confuse protection with secrecy. Children confuse independence with refusing guidance. People avoid difficult conversations because silence feels peaceful, but unspoken resentment rarely disappears. It waits until someone else learns how to use it. Forgiveness did not restore Rebecca to her former position. Justice did not erase her mistakes. Love did not require me to pretend she had done nothing wrong. Real love allowed truth and mercy to stand together. We cannot recover every year lost to pride, grief, or misunderstanding, but we can stop sacrificing the future to defend the past. The worn briefcase once contained the legal power to control a company. In the end, its greatest value came when it held nothing except a mother's words. Because legacy is not the authority we keep, it is the responsibility we teach others to carry. If this story touched your heart, please share your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe Peggy was right to remove Rebecca as CFO while still giving her a chance to rebuild her life? Subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories about family betrayal, justice, forgiveness, and second chances. And please share this video with someone who may need the reminder that truth can hold people accountable without destroying the possibility of redemption.